Yeah.
So
Huh.
I think contemplation has to be somehow held within our awareness, but we're not holding kind of an object. So when we're kind of paying attention to something that we're learning,
Yeah.
there's a strong sense of me learning about that thing.
Yeah.
For me, the contemplative space is firstly this kind of an embodied experiential awareness about what it is that we are trying to understand more deeply.
Yeah.
But it is not about the simple propositional knowing of it.
Yeah.
It's something, it's an awareness that it's all a beholding
Yeah.
of the thing that we're looking at. It's not a
Yeah.
conceptual designation. So for me, that I can feel it differently in my body. Like
I totally feel it too as you're describing it.
there's something around that. And then there's an openness. So contemplation for me is we're not actually trying to know it in some definitive sense. We're kind of opening to the mystery of whatever the subject of the contemplation is.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Circling Dialogos. If you are inspired by what we talk about on this channel and want to dive deeper and in fellowship with others, there's a number of ways you can do that. One is to become my client and work one-on-one with me. We also have circling events every week open to the public. We also do weekend intensives for circling every 4 to 6 weeks or so. And we have a year-long Art of Circling practitioner training program. We also have self-study programs that you can do at your own pace. All the relevant links, including my email, is below in the show notes. Please let me know if you have any questions. And enjoy this show. Thank you so much.
So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nice. It's nice finding you and finding each other here. Yeah. I was as we were talking before we were recording, you had sent me over some of like some of the things that you've written, and you know, and I'll ask you to kind of talk a little bit about like the work that you're doing and how you speak about it. However, there was that the first link was to that recent blog article that you wrote. Um, and and it was really interesting because I that first paragraph, um, what struck me about that paragraph is that it in some ways really articulated my kind of um, initial sense of you, like in a clear way. A lot, and it just gives some context for this. It's like one of the things I've noticed in like doing one-on-one work with people is oftentimes the person comes in, and in that first instance of meeting them, like something shines through that I spend the next 10 years understanding.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't necessarily have that with everyone, but when we first talked after the Dialogos course that you participated in on Zoom, I got kind of a hit of something about you. Like and I think that first paragraph really exemplified it. Um in fact, if you don't mind, I'd love to just read it.
Yeah, please do, because I was going to ask you, I was just going to ask for a moment to find it and refresh my
Yeah.
memory. So I'd love you to.
Yeah, I'll read it because it really struck me. There it is. Okay, I'll just read the first paragraph. So it says, I have recently taken a year off work and now find myself back in my role in the School of Health and Social Care. But after a year of spaciousness, with periods of intense meditative practice, it has not been possible to put my world back together again in the way it was. This is a good sign. Practices of,
I think it's progress.
yes, that practices of meditation, study, and friendship are having an effect. If nothing changes, then what's the point? But curiously, I have not experienced change that has led to resolution or completion. The questions become even bigger, and the ungraspable, indefinable nature of things continuously disrupts the confidence I once had in how I knew things to be. Things get simultaneously clear and more mysterious, more deeply tender, and more ecstatically joyful. As the certainties of my worldview fall away, it is unclear whether it will be replaced, and if so, by what. And this has got me thinking about research on mindfulness and contemplative practice, and how our ways of knowing may be impeding the questions being asked and the answers being found. Might our current framing be preventing us from understanding what matters? If this interests you, read on. And there's some, I just going to say what I heard, or what felt like the through line of just my small amount of experiencing you, is this what I kind of got in that paragraph was, on one level you were talking about something really deeply personal to you, right? Like the most close in, intimate thing of your life and your situation and who you are and what you're doing. And yet there's this way that was also transparent to these deeper, more broader, like societal, right? Like everything from like where science is coming from, right? These broader perplexities, right? That you can call the meta crisis or the meaning crisis, or like all the different words that we have for that. And I sense that this I sense a tenderness in between those two. Like there's like I just feel like there's just a real tenderness between those two, right? Like you're vulnerable on both sides of the equation. You're vulnerable to the macro and to the most personal and the micro. And and I just got that there's something about that just I think I can feel that from you. And it has me think about like me think about like you minding the pace, right? And the cadence and the tempo of your work must be really important, right? Like there needs to probably be a certain rhythm or a slowness, right? So that you can stay vulnerable versus just being exposed, right? To like things like this kind of vulnerability. And then my understanding is that, you know, that the essence of your work has to do with contemplation, right? You know, I think you call it contemplative pedagogy is what you're doing your research in. And there's something about being to contemplate, right? Is it's funny because I have been doing a deep dive into Meister Eckhart, who, in my view, right, is like almost like a symbol for contemplative practice in in true sense. And so walking with him, I've been really kind of like feeling this question come up with me, like, what, there is something distinct about to contemplate. If I say I'm contemplating versus I'm philosophizing, right?
Yep.
Or trying to figure something out. Like there's clearly a connection there, but they're not the same thing, right? And there's something about this proactive vulnerability, this kind of like meeting something with more, turning towards something with much surface area and being open to being perplexed and being in a mystery and actually like valuing that, right? All that's in there. And I kind of get, there's a sense of like, it just makes sense to me that your work would be about contemplation in some way. Like, and just get the sense of how really personal it is to you. And it has me just drawn into wanting to understand that more.
Yeah. No, well, you definitely really, it is tender. It is really tender. And I kind of, and there is a vulnerability there. There is, it's like I'm working really at the forefront of something that just feels so deeply important to me. And I feel like, in a way, I haven't really made a choice to do that. In fact, I think there would probably be, would I make the choice not to do it? Probably not anymore. But I didn't really realize when I started getting into working around contemplative pedagogy in particular, I don't think I really realized how personal and how, I think personal is the wrong word, actually, but it's very deep. Yeah. And I didn't really realize that it was until we organized one of our first kind of face-to-face events for the Contemplative Pedagogy Network that I set up in 2014. And people came up at the end, and it was a very small event. And in a lot of ways, some people may have said that it wasn't necessarily a success. It didn't generate profit. It didn't generate huge crowds of people, but it felt really significant for those of us that were there. And when people came up and thanked me at the end, I actually just had to take myself away because I just felt so kind of emotional. And that sense of the significance of this work has just stayed with me. And I think people who have come to those events have now just got used to me being quite emotional. And I think you've really picked up on that kind of, the reason the question that this feels so deep is, I think on the one hand, is this very deep personal practice, which has taken on a particular form within Buddhism. But actually what I feel called to in the world is not only to be a Buddhist and a Buddhist teacher, but to find ways of exploring the depths that Buddhism opens up for us as human beings in ways that go beyond the language of any one tradition or whatever. And so there's this idea of contemplative in a broader sense, and bringing that into contact with education feels just incredibly rich and is starting to feel more and more kind of important. And I feel like the work that you're doing, the work that John Vervaeke's doing in particular, I just feel is starting to give me a language that I haven't had before. I haven't had, and prior to some of my work over this last year, I kind of feel like when I've been talking about contemplative pedagogy and contemplative education, I feel like I've kind of been restricted because I haven't wanted to use a religious language to talk about the depth to which contemplative practice can reach.
Yeah.
Because I think that can be quite alienating for people.
Yeah.
And so what I guess I feel like I'm kind of on the search for is a way of looking at contemplative pedagogy and education that points to the transcendental potential,
Yeah.
but without constraining it in a particular language where some people might read it and think this isn't for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that kind of feels like where things are and heading. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Let me see if I can say how it makes sense. Like, well, first it's like you talked about, I hope you're enjoying this video so far. Just wanted to remind you, if you are interested in diving deeper in what we talk about here on the channel, in fellowship and in a more embodied way, there are a number of relevant links in the show notes, including working with me one-on-one as a client. All the information is below, including my email address. Like when you headed into looking at this pedagogy, right, and contemplative pedagogy, looking at the connections with those, it wasn't like you were expecting to be, in some sense, so at stake in the matter, right? But I got this sense, like this sense where you found yourself already in it, at the verge of tears continuously. And you're like, I don't know if I would have chose this exactly. Like this is quite a place to be, right? And also I heard now that you're there, you realize like maybe you couldn't have not chosen it in some sense, right? Yeah. So that's really interesting. Just that notion of like you were following something, and then you found yourself inside of it, contending with it, and like it just drew a lot of what's most, yeah, I guess personal isn't quite the word. It sounds like it's like how intimate it is.
Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah, intimacy. It is, and like being in intimacy is like, you know, it's interesting. People usually think of intimacy and they think of like all this kind of like almost safety and gooey closeness. And I think that's the result of intimacy. But actually, moments of intimacy are anything but safe, right?
They're not safe. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, it's like constantly this paradox between like my two deepest drives of belonging and agency, right? Like I have 100% a drive for agency and I have 100% a drive for belonging. And like moments of intimacy are usually those moments where you're in a relationship and it looks like if I'm really myself, I'll lose you. I can't do that. But then if I don't say and be me, I'll lose me. Wait a minute, I can't do that. And there's this kind of like nexus point, and then you know you feel anxious and like usually stall a lot and treader, and then you say the thing, right? But then the saying of it opens you into a dimension beyond what you could have comprehended. So the thing you were usually the most anxious about, like maybe you find something to be even more anxious about on the other side, but oftentimes you find like you're just in a new level of reality almost, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely think that's true. And I think the other thing that you mentioned that I really resonated with, you mentioned about things taking time. And I set up the Contemplative Pedagogy Network in 2014, and in 2021 I kind of knew that my time kind of leading it was done. I kind of felt very strong. I felt as though the network had its own energy and I was all of a sudden in the way. Like I was a big boulder in a river and I just needed to move myself. And I don't know why I felt like that. I couldn't really explain to anyone why I felt like that, but I did. Luckily, a lovely team of people have now taken the network on and are leading it to new developments. It's great.
Yeah.
But I think that the more recent stuff I've been talking about and blogging about, and you've seen the draft paper about, that has come as a result of, I took a year off work. I got ordained last year. So there's been a kind of a long period of going inwards and kind of abandoning the work that I'd done, not abandoning it, but stepping away from it.
Yeah.
And then because I felt like I needed space for new things to kind of emerge, and that instinct kind of proved right. It just felt like it's been the right time to step away and the right time to come back. And but it has taken its own time, as you say. It feels like the kind of the vulnerability and the way in which my work is kind of getting braver and braver and braver is also a reflection of my deepening personal practice. You know, there's definitely a interconnection there. I can't imagine how there wouldn't be. So.
Can I ask you what was that like letting that go and stepping out of the way? Was that an easy thing to do? Did it have its difficulties? Like,
it was easy because it was just so clear. It was just so clear. And what was really interesting was it was so clear that I remember writing an email to a few kind of close, I can't remember if it was one person or a couple of close people, collaborators on the network, and kind of saying that this was the way I felt. And I said, ideally, I would love someone to step in and say, we want to continue the work, and it continues. But I've reached the point where I know this is not what I need to do anymore. And if that means that the network is no more, then it's done. And I don't know why it was so clear, but the clarity of it just made it quite easy. It wouldn't have been, you know, I'm not saying there wasn't an emotional tie to it, but the clarity of that decision just made it incredibly straightforward in the end.
Wow. And what I'm meaning is it's not like the clarity came with a bunch of propositional content that explained the reasons why it was clear.
No, in a way, it was a stupid decision. because you know, I found this network, it was becoming quite successful. It's nice to put on my CV. It looks good when I go into appraisal at work to have this thing. But it was done for me. And not saying that the network's done, and I still have contact and go to their events, and I'm really supportive of their work. But for me, in terms of leading it, it was done. And that, to me, I can't explain to you why it was so clear. But on one hand, it was a silly decision.
Right. Totally. So there sounds like there's, I'm really interested in that sense. Well, first of all, I mean, that's a whole conversation about like a good personal example of this is so I moved to how I ended up in San Francisco was I went to the San Francisco Art Institute. I was a painter and a sculptor, and a lot of what we would talk about is that the real art is knowing when the painting's done, which is not obvious, like, because it's like, you know, like there's so many times I've like gone past the point and then it ruins the painting, or there's some line that's not totally obvious that like the art is like starting to feel when it's done, right? And I felt a similar sense of that. There is really something about how do you know when to let something go? And like what I heard you say is like actually at a you know, a professional level, like at a, you know, a brand level, or, you know, an ego level, or whatever way you want to call that, that actually didn't make a whole lot of sense if you looked at it at that level, right? But there's something different. There's something other than that you were attuning to that that made it obvious to you.
Yeah.
And it sounds
Yeah.
like whatever that is has a kind of apophatic element to it.
I'm not sure what you mean by that last word. Do you mean like embodied kind of sense?
Yeah, it's like, well, it's more like uh like not non-propositional or ineffable.
Yeah.
Like there's a mystery there. Like the clarity is eminent, right? But like why it's clear is kind of is a mystery.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say, definitely. And I guess I've experienced that a few times in my life. So firstly, asking my husband to marry me, and secondly, asking for ordination. So those are other times in my life where I've had that sense of absolute, like, this is what to do.
What was the second thing? The first one was asking your husband to
First
marry
one was
you?
proposing to my husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the second one was asking to enter the training for ordination within the Buddhist tradition. Yeah.
What is that the name of a what is the donation name?
Sorry, ordination.
Ordination. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So that was a case of like where what to do was really clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, there was that sense of, I don't really know why I want to do this. On some levels, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense and may appear a little bit rash, or you know, I can't defend it in rational terms, and yet this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. It's so itchy. There's something there that's just really there's some through line there that really is just glowing to me. But I'm curious about like, did you like growing up in your family, was your family religious? What was like it wasn't religious? I'm
Not
curious.
really. I would probably go as far as to say my dad is almost anti kind of religion, not in a really strong way, but yeah, it definitely has lots of questions about it. When I was young, my mum used to take us to a Methodist Sunday school, but I didn't ever experience her as being religious, and we were never christened or baptized or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think it was just more somewhere where we would go and meet up with friends rather than actually. I certainly didn't take on a strong religious view.
Yeah.
But I did, from quite young, feel, I just had this sense that there was something about the world that was kind of deeper and more beautiful than people seem to be aware of. And I used to, my parents' house, in fact, they still live there where I grew up, is on the seafront. And so you can see the sea. And I used to spend quite a lot of time watching like the moon on the water and just feeling like, oh, I couldn't have said what it was at the time.
Yeah.
But I had diaries full of how beautiful the world was and how there was a depth there. So it's like I could feel something. But then as a young teenager, I think I just thought, I've just got it wrong. Because no one else seems to be aware, or no one else seems to be interested in this. So why am I, so I kind of shut that down, I think, in my early teens, and got interested in being a teenager and worried about exams and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I went to medical school and had a serious mental breakdown, and had very, very severe depression that took a good few years for me to come out of, and had to drop out of medical school. And it was during that time that my mum in her kind of desperation to make me better, would send me to all these alternative kind of healers. I went to faith healers and acupuncturists and all sorts. And one of those people was the woman that is now actually my mother-in-law. And she was a Reiki healer at the time. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of the healing aspect, but she started just to question, about, well, what did depression mean to me? She was just a bit pokey around this label that I'd been kind of given by the medical kind of model. And she started giving me all these weird books to read.
Yeah.
And kind of recommendations. So then all of a sudden I was kind of in this whole world of kind of wacky, kind of new age kind of literature.
Yeah.
But it reminded me of this thing that I knew when I was younger. And then that was the start of the reorientation of my whole life, really.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So there was, so it sounds like neither your parents, your dad explicitly wasn't religious, right? In some sense. And it sounds like your mom she sounds open-minded, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like open-minded. And what I'm hearing, I think I heard you use describe the first contact with the deeper dimension is you used the word beauty 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like
really powerful way.
Yeah. Like so beauty is really like where it entered you. And I would imagine it enter you and there is more going on here than what people are talking about. So if I were you, I'd be like, well, let's talk about it. But then I could imagine you didn't hear cheers. Like, oh, I've been waiting for you to talk about this. It's like they didn't see it. And so then being a teenager, yes.
Yeah, and to be fair, I didn't try and instigate any conversation. I don't remember trying any conversations and then being pushed back. It was just a sense that I just thought, oh, yeah, I've got the wrong end of the stick, and I was kind of all right with that. It wasn't I didn't experience it at the time as a struggle.
Yeah.
But it's kind of in the looking back that I kind of recognize those kind of early sparks of something.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the when you were in medical school, was the depression did it have anything to do with being in medical school, or?
I think it was triggered by having an appendicitis in my first term at medical school.
Okay.
And I didn't really allow myself to heal. At the time, I was so determined. So instead of coming home to get better from my appendicitis, I decided to try and stay at university and push through. And I didn't want to come home. So I just tried to stay and carry on. And all I did was create a bigger and darker black hole. And because I'd never experienced any sort of depression or anything before, I didn't really know what was happening.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really see that I was just making myself worse.
Yeah. That physiological depression, man. Having gone through that after, going through that, it was like I didn't even know that there was because it's like this, it's some background neurobiological hum that I didn't even know that I had that was allowing me to be interested in things and all this kind of stuff until it went away. And it's such a strange experience to kind of recognize that you were in some sense reliant on something totally outside of your control, right? In some respects, right? That's that can be a really cause one. It's like it for me, it really challenged my categories of how I saw things, right? Is there's something about that that's really quite deeply impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was really angry for a long time. I used to be very confident that I knew a lot.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
knew how I
Right.
knew how my life was gonna turn out, and I knew how I was gonna get myself there.
Yeah.
And then to experience this situation where I felt completely powerless. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it was just
Yeah.
like a lot of million deaths.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like you get this sense you didn't have a frame. You didn't have a frame to be able to make
No
sense of
frame.
that. Yeah.
No frame. No,
Right.
no frame at all. I just couldn't. Had no way of seeing kind of what was happening, and I was very lucky actually to have such a good family, and particularly a very proactive mum who were willing to throw whatever at getting
Yeah.
me. But ultimately, I think yeah, there was just a lot of learning, and a lot of surrender that had to go on for me to move
Yeah.
kind of forward.
And so then you started reading these kind of new age books,
Yeah.
right? And it reminded you, right, of this dimension that you had kind of like forgotten about or let go.
Yeah.
And the through line through those is where things started to open up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of through my 20s, I went back to university, but I stayed at a university that was much closer to home, which felt much safer.
Mm-hmm.
I also did a much easier subject. So I wasn't going to go back and do medicine.
Yeah.
And then just started to kind of, I learned to meditate, started to do like 5 rhythms dance,
Yeah.
different breath practices. I started to go on different kinds of camps and summer camps and new age kind of retreat type things.
Yeah.
But I didn't really find anything that, and it was all helping. It was all kind of really important kind of processing kind of stuff. But it wasn't until I met Buddhism that the light really went on. And I think what Buddhism, when I met Buddhism, particularly there was a particular retreat that really was a bit of a game changer. And I could just see how it was so applied and so practical. And some of the other stuff I met just felt a bit, I was being asked to believe things that I didn't believe in, it just felt a bit kind of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but kind of pink and fluffy, that kind of stereotypical kind of new age stuff. And I was just like, there was something there, but I couldn't relate to it in that form. And then I went on this particular retreat where there was just a real focus on practice. And I was like, oh, I think I kind of think maybe I was waiting for a moment of inspiration, at which point I was going to become enlightened. And then all of a sudden, Buddhism came along and was like, do the work. And I was sold on that. That felt sensible to me.
Yeah, totally. It's funny when you said that, I just kind of felt like a dialectic of 2 parts of you, right, coming together. Because it sounds like you had a really good work ethic. In fact, your response to being depressed is go harder, right? It sounds like you are not deficient in will, right?
No. And actually, one of my teachers on a particular retreat, I was really struggling, and she kind of pulled me aside and we were discussing why I was struggling. And she said, some people on the path need to learn how to work harder and try harder. She said, you are not one of those people.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. Yeah. But it took someone to explain it that clearly to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't, it was like, it's one of the aspects of myself that creeps up without me really noticing.
Yeah.
So I kind of need people around me
sneaky.
To block it.
That one's sneaky.
It is really sneaky.
But I could really get what you're saying, though. Like in some sense, showing up at a retreat, and then, as you said, is an interesting word that you use, is that to meet Buddhism, when you met Buddhism, right? Like that's an interesting way of putting it. Like, like I get the sense there's a certain, well, there's a thou implied in that.
Yeah.
And I think what's making sense to me is about that is like, you know, in some way, this new other, the Buddha or Buddhism, right? So clearly is probably like connected to this thing that you were connected to when you were a child, right? But at the same time, like in some way, really doing the work, right? Like really this practical dimension, right? And linking those two together, I can kind of feel a new gestalt that you were inside of, that you could really sink into.
Completely. Because I think before then it was almost like, I was looking for kind of spiritual awakening, I guess. I don't really like the word spiritual either, so I find myself in a bit of a knot. But I kind of wanted some being to tap me on the shoulder and enlighten me or something. Do you know, I was looking for that kind of easy experience where I was the chosen one or something. You know, I never got quite that deluded, but something of that nature. But that always felt completely arbitrary and completely out of my control. So I didn't want to spend my life waiting around for this sudden inspiration. It didn't feel quite right. And so when I met these kind of practices and people applying them in such a meaningful way, I just was like, oh, this is what I've needed. This is what I've needed and wanted. And of course, that giving into that and doing the work is not easy, but it's a bit of a relief to feel that, okay, that's the form that it takes for me, and that's fine. And
it sounds like was there also, I was wondering if there was a shift in context for you, because it sounds like the initial, you know, introduction to the kind of the new age stuff and that context that you just drew out of like kind of looking for the moment or the something special. I got the sense that like at that point it was still really about trying to heal. Is that?
I think by then it had become about truth. And actually looking back, those experiences of beauty as a child, I still think there was an element of sensing that things weren't quite as I was being told they were. And the way that society was portraying them to me. And so I think even quite young, there's been this sense of kind of truth. I want to know, I deeply want to know the truth. And and that has just got stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. My sense of that truth has changed significantly, but that has still been a very powerful thread. This wanting to know the truth is something that comes up again and again.
Yeah, totally. So it was like, that's actually like what I heard you say is like underneath it all, right? That's been the drive. That's been the hunger, the desire.
Oh yeah.
The telos. Yeah, totally. Totally.
And I think like when I kind of in my year off work and coming across these new ideas and exploring cognitive science for the first time and that kind of thing, it's like, oh, there's other ways that we can start to describe these truths. You know, we don't have to be stuck within these religious models, which can feel like they create more division than they solve sometimes. And I think that's my excitement around some of the stuff around contemplative education, is how do we develop an education where there is space and exploration of the truth? Like,
yeah, totally.
like that just blows my mind.
Totally, totally. And there's something about, like, it sounds like what I'm hearing is, it sounds like kind of people like Vervaeke and cognitive science, and like finding people, like as Vervaeke would say, exapting out, right? This notion of like that there's a, like the through line through all these practices, right? And what I heard you say is that gave you, or presented this possibility where rather than like trying to make education about, like, say, Buddhism and meditating in this, like, the specific practices, actually it's what those practices, the dimensions that they disclose, right?
Exactly.
That's what you're interested in.
That is absolutely what I'm interested in. Yeah, absolutely. And I think and I think what am I thinking? And I think I've mentioned on Vervaeke's work, I think Francisco Varela as well, with the enactive approach, has also been really kind of key. Yeah, absolutely.
He's otherworldly almost, right?
Yeah, completely. And I'm on the faculty this year for the European Summer Research Institute, organised by the Mind and Life Institute. And the topic is living in groundlessness with responsibility. Which
Hey guys, there. Let me just. You tell I got to put my seatbelt on for that one.
Yeah. I was like, I can't believe someone was organising a conference on that. But anyway.
Was it, say it again, living in groundlessness? While taking responsibility.
With responsibility. Yeah.
God, there's so much that says. Wow. There's so much that says. Yeah, because you usually think about, like, taking responsibility has this kind of very kind of presupposes I don't know, something definite or tangible or graspable. But he's saying, no, as the cosmic wind is like going up your skirt, right? Whistling up through your nose. Like, take responsibility, be responsible in it, right? Like, it begs this question of this, what does that mean, actually?
I think everyone will give you a different explanation, but I think for me, it's really around how, when we kind of come to understand our lack of ground, you know, the lack of kind of subject-object duality, you know, when we come to see that more clearly, actually there is a possibility of, or it opens out the possibility of increasing kind of ethical sensitivity. I mean, this is central to kind of Buddhist teaching, so I'm definitely aware that that's very much my kind of spin on it.
Yeah.
I think there's another way of looking at it, though. I think sometimes if we think about groundlessness and the Buddhist term shunyata, or emptiness, there can be quite a nihilistic response. Well, it's like, well, if I don't exist and you don't exist, then what's the point?
You know.
Actually, the whole week is really designed to kind of insist on the continuation of an ethical responsibility, even in a groundless world. But I also think that, and what I'm going to be talking about, is how actually that understanding of groundlessness, of our kind of dynamic and sort of existence, the unfolding of life in this much kind of freer way without a ground, if we can really see that, actually it offers the potential for ethical development that is not as open to us, I don't think, in a dualistic kind of other world.
Yeah.
So there's so many different ways of looking at it, and hopefully lots of those will come out during the week.
Totally. So striking. Yeah, it's so striking to think about that. And actually I was going to ask you about that, like when we were talking about, that like you've just come from like a solitary retreat. And one of the things you mentioned is like, sometimes what opens up is that emptiness opens up, and it's like, you grapple with the kind of nihilism that comes up. And he said this time, and I got a sense that this somehow grace almost was involved in this or something, but this time it was actually the nihilism wasn't what shone through. Like it was something else. And I'm drawn to like, I think I'm drawn to ask or think about like, or look at what is the difference that makes that difference?
I guess on the one hand, my response is, I wish I knew.
Yeah, right.
Because sometimes it feels quite arbitrary.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels really arbitrary. And I think particularly around our experience in the world and on retreats in particular, I can find myself thinking that I know what conditions lead to what outcome.
Yeah.
And of course, that's always misguided and always, especially misguided on a retreat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there are certain aspects. So one of them that I've noticed is on solitary retreats, I'm not very good if I feel really enclosed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you were to put me in a room in a house and tell me to meditate in that room, I would really struggle with that. But actually being really connected to nature and outside seems to really help.
Yeah.
Open out something else.
Yeah.
Also, I was in really quite positive mind states before I went in. And my last solitary retreat was at New Year, and I wasn't in nearly such positive mental states at the start of the retreat. So in a way, I think where you are beforehand is also an indicator.
Yeah, totally.
But and I think you do well. I've found that I've become a bit more skillful and less judgmental of mental states that arise on solitary retreat in particular, and a bit less strict about how a retreat needs to look. So coming back to my comment about my teacher saying, perhaps you're not someone that needs to learn to work harder. You need to learn how to back off.
Yeah.
I've had to take that into the way that I approach retreats, because my view was, well, I'm on retreat, so I need to spend every minute doing something that's a practice or going to help me achieve my goals, But actually, I've learned to really go into a solitary in particular now with much more of a kind of open hand. And now I tend to meditate quite a lot in the first few days, but then really sometimes that I can really back off, because actually there is this openness, there is this awareness that is part of my experience continually.
Yeah.
And I don't always need to layer lots of meditation on top of that. That experience itself can be the teacher.
Totally. It sounds like something, one of the things, when you talked about like, if I'm in an enclosed space, I'm more likely to struggle with the nihilism part versus if I'm sitting under a tree in nature, right? And it's interesting because I got the impression of like, in nature, there's the openness and there's the emptiness, but there's also the presence of horizons, right? Yeah. Like in a horizon, on one level, horizons are really trippy to think about when you really start thinking about a horizon, because it's like, one, you can't ever reach it, right? Two, it demarcates a limit, right? And like somehow that limit somehow gives the ground that you're at. Like knowing that horizon somehow grants the ground, right? But you can't ever reach that limit. But it also points to beyond. But doesn't reveal the beyond, but it points to the beyond. There's something about that like, I mean, I've just noticed in my own life, there's in those moments where it feels like the when the mystery is attuned to me, which is a mystery to me of like how I'm attuned to it and it's attuned, but when it's really attuned to me, like everything kind of glows with it. And I can tell in my sense of wonder, my sense of affinity, my like reverence, all of that. And like when it's not, man, I just suffer. Like something about that beyond horizon that's concealed, yet revealing its concealment, but yet somehow touching me in some way. Like when that's there, like it is a very different world. When it's not there, it's like I suffer in that kind of nihilistic way. Yeah, that's something I've personally like been wondering about for a long time. Because a part of me would just love to know the answer to that one, so I could just like, hit the apophatic button.
Yeah.
Fine, right? But there is something like not in my control about that just drives me a little crazy.
Yeah. No, I definitely share that. And I think once you've started to kind of have experiences like that, you just feel like you should be able to access them whenever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So the sense of your work around now, if I remember right, you're in the middle of your PhD. Did I hear that correctly? Or you're in the middle of writing something, or
that's it. I'm in the middle of, well, I'm hopefully towards the end and about to submit to a journal through a paper. My PhD was back in 2009. So
okay.
Yeah. And that was completely could not have predicted what I'm now doing. So and that paper really is kind of drawing together the work of people I've already mentioned. So Francisco Varela, John Vervaeke, looking at really that question that again we've mentioned a few times, which is around, actually you put it really well, what are those contemplative practices pointing to? What they may be framed differently within different traditions, but what is it? Is the beyond, that they're pointing to? And where we are at the moment, or at least my view about where we are at the moment in the field of contemplative kind of education more broadly, is we've had a very strong wave of kind of mindfulness kind of interventions in kind of education. And there's a lot of discussion now about their suitability for schools and the impact that it has in school settings, as well as university settings and things like that, which is interesting. We've also seen discussion around how contemplative approaches kind of connect with different theories like critical pedagogy and transformative educational theory, that kind of thing. Not a huge amount of work, but it's good to see those kind of connections being made. And what I'm hoping to do with this paper and my presentations at different events over the summer is try and instigate this discussion about how we can develop a framework that actually points to this kind of transcendental aspect of contemplative practice. So in the past, I've kind of vaguely used terms like insight or, I kind of feel like I've kind of been dancing around what I actually want to say. But with the work that we've already sort of mentioned, I feel like there's something there that could start to form something of a theoretical understanding that could really ignite a discussion. I mean, I don't think I've got it right, by any stretch of the imagination. But it's starting to instigate that discussion. And also, I think the other connecting thread for me is Evan Thompson's work and his recent book called The Blind Spot. And it's like I'm reading it at the moment. In fact, I've got it here. It gets to a point where using tags is just hopeless.
He's amazing.
And I think that his particular framing of this issue around the lack of recognizing the importance and the fundamentality of human experience in how we know the world, I think is just so important in education. And how we discuss that, I think, is going to be so important moving forward. And I think, although I haven't had time to kind of integrate the blind spot explicitly into this paper, I think that will inevitably influence and shape how things move forward. Because before, I think we haven't had, or at least I haven't been aware of tools to help us discuss what a world looks like without object duality outside of a religious or framing before. And actually now this work is starting to come forward, and I just find that really, really exciting, and could open up a lot of possibilities.
Totally. Yeah, I feel a lot of I can feel your inspiration, and I'm appreciating in the way that it's showing up, because it's like what I heard you say is like there's something on that horizon that's really clear to you, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't quite have all the words for it yet. You're getting more language, right? But this sense of this just fascinates me, of like how do we, like, when something calls to us and it grabs our attention or our interest, right? And we just are looking over there. And yet the thing I'm interested in isn't totally disclosed. In fact, it's kind of mysterious. So how the hell do I know to be interested in it? Right? There's something mysterious to me about that. But like I've noticed, it's that dynamic, right? That in some sense starts to draw in articulations that start to disclose it. But it's a weird thing because it's somehow present, right? But I don't have words for it. So how do I really, like, how does it live within me? And that's a really mysterious process. But I think that I call that the sweet spot, right? Like right in that sweet spot of like, yeah, you're really clear. There's something super important there. Like at some level, it's super clear based on your interest, and it's coming together, and you're still grappling with it, but it's all in getting closer into articulating. It just, there's something so alive about that. That strikes me as like just right at the sweet spot.
Yeah, it's true. And I think coming back to what you mentioned earlier, which was such an astute observation, was around time, and that year off and listening to random podcasts and hearing people's voices for the first time. It was only through hearing or starting to hear kind of little echoes of something that felt like it touched that puzzle in me, that gave me the kind of inspiration to kind of explore that puzzle a bit more. I wasn't even sure. I knew there was a puzzle in there. I wanted to do something around contemplative education.
Yeah.
I knew my approach before didn't feel like it was enough, or something. And I always felt like I was kind of, I've said before, just dancing around the edges of what I really wanted to say. And then in this time that I had, you could just play podcasts and hear these new ideas. And then I was like, okay, I've got to start taking this puzzle in me seriously, because although other people are working on their own puzzles, actually some of their puzzle pieces are for me.
Totally. Distinction, right? Like that. It's so interesting that I'm continually amazed of like what it is to get a distinction about something, right? Like it's funny to think about. You can only relate to something for which is distinct to you, right?
Yeah.
And so like the more distinctions that you have, the more you can see, the more you can relate with. And it's kind of like I get this sense of like at first there's this vague sense of that there's something about that color over there that seems I don't quite. And then you listen to a podcast and they give you this grammar that like breaks it into 10 different dimensions and all those things relate. And like then you can walk through those things, right? And then see more, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Like yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can still sort of remember when I first started to hear about ideas like kind of John Vervaeke talks about breaking frame and relevance realization and things like that. And it was just like that idea of breaking frame in particular. I was like, oh yeah, like that's what contemplative practice does, you know?
Right.
And I just had never heard a terminology that was so helpful.
Yeah. It's funny because like distinctions are like having distinctions, I think, is different than having knowledge. Like it's not really the same thing as having knowledge. It's like, in fact, like when you get a distinction, right, it allows you to see into something more and draws you more into like it reveals more of its inexhaustibility in some sense, right? Like it's just like with like probably the clearest example is like wine, right? Like when I first drank wine, it was like I had two distinctions, right? White and red, and it was just unsweetened grapefruit, unsweetened grape juice that burned, right? Then my friend go, no, who's really into wine, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, actually there is difference between this one and this one, and like there's all these distinctions about the initial opening and letting it, then the initial taste, and then the long finish or the short finish. And it's funny, it's like that transforms wine, right, into, and you think about it, like, and I think this was really interesting too, is if you kind of like don't assume a duality. If I'm the wine, who do I want to be drunk by? Right? Like, do I want to be drunk by Guy who has no distinctions, or my friend Ron who has all these distinctions, right? Spend time, I'm like, oh, it's going to be Ron because like I'll be more fully disclosed, right? In some sense.
Unless you're a bad wine, and then you think, well, I'll go with Guy because he won't notice.
Yes. Totally.
Yeah, so, no, I definitely get what you mean around distinction and how that then opens up another world. And I think part of the work for me though is around when you're working in a new area. It feels like there's always another distinction that I don't know about. You know, and so it's kind of also kind of knowing the kind of I guess it's in a way an intellectual limit that feels like a good way to contain where you're at now and what you're trying to say now. And part of like interesting, you said about the painting and not knowing when to stop. And I think like this work has been like that because it's like, well, I could go down this rabbit hole and that set of distinctions and this set of distinctions, but ultimately I can't know it all, you know, and I haven't got any philosophical training at all. So in this work, I'm coming across isms I've never heard of on a daily basis. But part of the work has been about noticing the distinctions that really matter to me and to my theory, and then being completely open to the idea that I've missed some really important distinctions. And that's fine. But it feels a bit like, for a while I was thinking, well, I'm never going to be able to talk to anyone about this work because I'm never going to understand it well enough, and you know, someone's going to ask me a tricky question on it and I'm just going to be stuck. And I'm just feeling really quite relaxed about that now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see.
Well, that's it. That strikes me. Just what you just said is like,
Mm.
oh, like I'm just going to go with what strikes me,
Mm.
right? Like that's my measure, right?
Mm.
That's how I know what's most relevant for me to do,
Mm.
right? Is the
Yeah.
thing that's speaking to you, that's calling to you, that's interesting you.
Yeah. Mm.
That's I
Yeah.
think I heard something similar in like how you knew to how you knew to leave the
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
also how you knew to propose to your husband. By the way, did he say did they say yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Yeah. He made it to husband status, so
Yes.
that was good.
Yes. And are you glad he said yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Very glad. Very glad.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Good. I'm really happy to hear about that. Yes. Yeah.
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 Mm.
So that there's that just yeah, I just appreciate that. Like there's a certain seems like there's a certain trust in that, right?
Yeah. I think there is actually there
Yeah.
is, and yeah, I think yeah there is, and it's and quite a few of those decisions have been, as we said before, just going against the grain or against what we might rationally do, and yet the felt sense was so kind of strong. And it's interesting, I've never thought about that in relationship to developing kind of intellectual ideas and arguments, but I think you're right in terms of that kind of gut feeling, although I probably in the academic sphere find it sometimes there isn't quite that clarity. So I still feel that I'm kind of wading through the mud a little bit with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that it doesn't feel like a bad thing. I think it's just part of a process.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, it's really clear to me that it needs to be done. That is what's clear. That is what's clear.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. It's so good talking with you. One of the things before we end, I want to just touch on a little bit. Pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's funny. I should know exactly what that word means, and at some level, I know exactly what that word means. But isn't it? I get the sense when someone says pedagogy, they're talking about a way of learning or a way of teaching. Like there's something more holistic than to say like curriculum, right? Or lesson plan, right? It's like something deeper back in context. What do you mean? Like for you, what is pedagogy?
Yeah, so I would very much agree with that. It's something that's slightly further back in context than the actual technical stuff of teaching, but it may include the technical stuff of teaching as well. But actually, there's quite a lot of debate, both how to pronounce it and what it means.
Oh, really?
So people will give, will give a different account. My understanding, when I use the term contemplative pedagogy, I'm meaning teaching that is in some way using some kind of contemplative approach in its application with students. So for me, pedagogy is kind of like the meeting of theory and application.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not quite as fine-grained as a learning outcome or a curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it kind of holds that.
Yeah.
But it can include kind of consideration of teaching technique as well.
Yeah.
In a slightly broader sense, rather than this is how I'm going to teach this particular thing at this particular time. So it's slightly broader. And the other term you may have heard me use, and that I'm increasingly using, is contemplative education. Yeah. And I'm using that to be, firstly, the term pedagogy isn't always useful for people who aren't don't actually work in teaching. It's not a particularly friendly or user-friendly word, as we've already established. So contemplative education, I think, is a bit more can be more easily understood by more people.
Yeah.
I also think perhaps we're talking about it in a slightly broader kind of a way than contemplative pedagogy. But I think there are people that could argue that both ways. So
yeah. So it's like pedagogy. Is it like fair to say your pedagogy is kind of like the place you come from, right? In the way you unfold the education process, right? It's like the principles or the context of like the way of some kind. And so, well, I guess my next question is like contemplation.
Mhm.
What makes, because this is actually really alive for me, right? Personally, like what is it that makes contemplation, right?
Mm.
And not like, I don't know, scientific inquiry or even philosophy. Because I've been practicing this with Eckhart, right? And there's a very distinct thing going on. I don't know if I could really explain it, but it's different than like when I, read Kant or something like that. Like it puts me into contemplation. What for you? Could you maybe wrestle out a few words about what the shape of that is for you?
I guess firstly would be around awareness.
Yeah.
So I think contemplation has to be somehow held within our awareness, but we're not holding kind of an object. So when we're kind of paying attention to something that we're learning, there's a strong sense of me learning about that thing.
Yeah.
For me, the contemplative space is firstly this kind of an embodied experiential awareness about what it is that we are trying to understand more deeply.
Yeah.
But it is not about the simple propositional knowing of it.
Yeah.
It's an awareness that it's all a beholding of the thing that we're looking at. It's not a conceptual designation. So for me, that I can feel it differently in my body. Like
I totally feel it too as you're describing it.
There's something around that. And then there's an openness. So contemplation for me is we're not actually trying to know it in some definitive sense. We're kind of opening to the mystery of whatever the subject of the contemplation is.
Yeah.
It's almost like, and I guess this, well, I'm sure you'll say whether or not you see the connection, but it's almost like you're opening up a contemplative dialogue, almost, not a verbal dialogue, but a kind of an openness to an interaction with something you're trying to understand more deeply, that is not just about words and concepts. It's not just about the propositional. And I think in contemplation, we're not just trying to learn, we're allowing ourselves to potentially be changed, our being to be changed by what it is that we know, by what it is that we learn. Yeah. So it's not just about changing what it is that we know, increasing our knowledge. It's actually allowing ourselves to be open in such a way that our being is altered by the encounter with what it is that we're contemplating.
Yeah, the encounter. That seems like that really strikes me. It's funny as you're talking about this. It sounds to me something very similar to the way Buber talks about like the shift of relating to I it to I thou. I got this real deep sense. It's like maybe that you're contemplating, I don't know, a Zen koan or whatever it is that content that you're looking at. It sounds like there's this, when you go like this, right? There's in some sense, you're allowing it to address you and you address it, right? Like yeah, it's a relation. Like I get the sense it's very relational. Like, and yeah, and how do it's on some level, like really like I'm knowing you, which is indistinguishable from the impact that you're having on me. That's how I know you. Like, like I undergo you. I mean, it's definitely the case with my wife. We've been undergoing each other for, 13 years, man. And they're
I love that. I'm sure she'll be flattered with that as a description of your marriage.
yes, totally. And one of the things that always struck me about that I've always really appreciated about the way Buber talks about this is like he says, I and I thou is spoken always as one word, and I it is always spoken as one word. And what I get from that is that it's not like there's thous out there, some it's out there's, and I's out there that then come together. It's the moment of a kind of address happens. In some sense, like when I see you as thou, there's a like a particular I that co-arises, right? And that I would imagine in some sense, like I definitely feel that in circling, like where